Rather than going to some sort of expert or whatever, I thought we'd have a listen to a couple of people that I met at something called Stand in the Pub yesterday here in Bristol. And this is one of those organisations that was set up by what you might call the anti-lockdown crew all over the country. These Stand in the Park groups were set up. They've now become more like, rather than going to the park, because that's all the only place you were allowed to go during lockdowns, they're now called Stand in the Pub, and they are all over the country. This Bristol Stand in the Pub group, which I now think is called Sit in the Pub Telegram group. Anyway, let's have a listen now to what a couple of punters who were there really just to talk about freedom generally post-lockdown had to say about Ukraine.
I worry about the mainstream media narrative around Ukraine and how it's kind of made out to be like this has just happened, like Putin has literally just walked into the Ukraine and invaded and so forth, and all Russians are evil. I think you have to look at a little bit of the history of Ukraine and the American involvement and the globalist involvement over there, and pretty much how it's all been manufactured to arrive at this point now where we're looking at potential war right across Europe at the moment. So I just don't believe what mainstream media is saying about it to be.
Why not?
Because I mean, I've come to believe that anything that comes out of the BBC is just pure propaganda, and we've seen in the past how propaganda has been used to manipulate situations and reap benefits from different situations in that way. And I do believe that our minds are being controlled by mainstream media and all the devices that we're put in front of these days. So critical thinking is against us. We're not taught to critically think about, or even allowed to critically think about, these things. So
we're just about a month into the Russian operation in Ukraine, or invasion, whatever you want to call it. Where do you think it's heading, and how long is it going to take?
I think what's going on in Ukraine at the moment is probably going to be going on for quite a long time. I think that benefits the globalists, the bankers, the financiers, and so forth. So I think quite a long time.
How does it?
It's going to be a bit like an Afghanistan situation. Yeah.
How does that benefit them?
Because in the West we've got pretty much bankrupt in the West, and we've got inflation running at hyper levels, and it's just about pulling the resources out of all these areas. What does that do? It sort of it crudes up the military industrial complex, the pharmaceutical industry, and so forth. All the money's going into those areas and the big corporations. So,
COVID seems to have disappeared, doesn't it? Almost just as Ukraine has arrived on the scene.
Well, I think they're probably preparing for the next pandemic, at the moment. So a little distraction over in Ukraine, and down the line, because we've got all these biolabs, that have been discovered. And, we'll surely have another leak right across Europe again in the near future. And they'll have to get the vaccines out, to, pump the money in again.
I mean, I agree with most of what this chap's just said. The history, the sense of context, the fact that the timeline didn't start 4 weeks ago or a month or two ago, but it started arguably in 2014 with the Maidan coup, and that's known that was the Western instigated coup to install their own leader, preferred leader, the interim one, and then subsequently, a very questionable election where they installed their own pro-Western leader.
He was live on Channel 4 News tonight, actually. Poroshenko, the chocolate billionaire.
Really? Okay. So, and now they've got another one who's essentially a professional actor and comedian who is doing their bidding, and arguably his speeches to Congress and to the Parliament were scripted, because they didn't sound like something coming out of a grassroots Ukrainian leader. But so the Maidan coup, I mean, that was proven to be done by the West because they even confessed it, and it was leaked phone call, between one of the US leaders,
Victoria Nuland and somebody Piat, who was the American ambassador to Ukraine.
Exactly.
Saying basically, this is the guy who's going to become the Prime Minister, and of course he did.
Exactly. Yeah, so that's known. You can't argue the fact about that. So why was that done? And it was also, it's also been discovered that there were suspicious sniper shootings in the Maidan coup and so on. So it all amounts up to the fact that the West instigated that, and plus what about the whole point about the NATO expansion towards the east? It was said in, I think, 1989 or 90 that the NATO, they promised that, was it Munich Agreement, that NATO would not expand 1 inch to the east, and they've been incorporated into several Eastern European countries. Ukraine wanted NATO to join, wanted to join NATO before the war, and arguably this war would never have happened. Now they have agreed, Ukraine have submitted or agreed to the Russian demand that they won't join NATO. If they had agreed that a month ago, this war would never have happened. So it's actually Ukraine's fault, that's been caused. And then what about all the sanctions? It just doesn't make any sense that the US has sanctioned Russia to the hilt. Even Wall Street, the bankers in the US didn't want the Biden administration to sanction the central bank in Moscow, but they went ahead and did it. And what's happened? They hoped that would crash the economy in Russia. No, it hasn't. It hasn't done that. They've got a bit of inflation, but just like us. There's no hyperinflation, as they hoped would happen. And Putin's ratings have gone up and up and up. So, it's shot themselves in the foot.
It will affect Europe far more than probably it'll affect Russia. We will feel the effects of that, because Russia has basically got a stranglehold on Europe with the gas and the oil and the wheat and the fertilisers and
Can I ask you also the question about where you think this is heading, how long it will last, and how it's going to end up?
Well, I think I'm a bit more optimistic. As far as I'm aware, Russia have dominated. I mean, it's an asymmetrical warfare, vastly outnumbered. It's like putting a 12-year-old in the ring with Mike Tyson. You know what the outcome will be. So there's no chance that Ukraine will win the war. They're already losing in the Donbass. I mean, you've got the whole point about the Donbass, the east of Ukraine, that was never acknowledged by the Western authorities or media or whatever. The fact that after the Maidan coup, as mentioned, there's been 8 years. Since then, there's been 8 years of massacres and oppression of not just in Donbass but the whole of Ukraine. They've forbidden Russian from being spoken. Bearing in mind that 20% of Ukraine is ethnic Russian, 80% of the Donbass in the east is ethnic Russian, and they banned Russian from being spoken, and they banned all of the Russian TV stations. If that's not discrimination, I don't know what is. Not only that, but there's been constant intermittent shelling and sniper fire and killing, in fact, in Donbass.
The question originally was about how long it's going to last. What do you think?
Sorry, I went off the subject, but that was the context. So I think with this asymmetric warfare, Russia's wrapping it up now. They've already surrounded the Ukrainian army in the east. The cauldron, they call it a cauldron, which means that their tactic is to surround the army in the two main areas in the east, and cut them off from their resources and their supplies, and gradually heat that cauldron up, which they're doing, and basically they're wiping out the Ukrainian army as we speak.
And they're asking for them to surrender, but they won't.
No, that's true. And in response, the US and the West are basically trying to flood Ukraine with arms, which is an extremely dangerous. It just escalates the problem. It prolongs the problem, but it doesn't help.
A no air flight zone in the area as well, which potentially could extend this particular war.
Could you put a date on how long do you think? How many more weeks, months, years, or whatever?
Probably within a month they'll be. They'll have won in Odessa and Mariupol, the two main port cities on the Black Sea, which are predominantly Russian-speaking ethnically, and also in the two cities in the Donbass as well. I'd say within a month they'll have pretty much wrapped it up. As to the wider Ukraine and Kiev and over towards the west, that might be a longer struggle, and it also depends on...
Do you think they'll want to move further west?
Well, I suppose they've got military presence in the west as well. I'm a bit more hazy on the facts on the ground there.
I don't think that Russia particularly want to take the whole of the Ukraine. I think they just want to sanction that particular area that you were talking about. But that war in that area has been going on for 8 years, so it's just like a continuation at the moment, I feel. But I think also when they get that stranglehold on that area, I think NATO may well respond or react, and there'll be further military weaponry going in there. So I just think it'll extend it because of that.
True. Sure, I mean, that's quite a definite possibility that it will extend it. I don't think a comparison with Afghanistan is quite on the money, because I mean, it may prolong the situation, but I mean, if it remains a conventional war, which we all obviously hope for, I don't think NATO have any intention of escalating it. They don't want to get involved. They don't want to make it into a nuclear problem. That would be a disaster.
There's been talk about possible chemical weapons attack, hasn't there, by the Russians?
Yeah, very similar to the White Hat operations in Syria as well. Yeah, so again, that could extend things again. Because what they start doing is drawing red lines in the sand, and are you going to cross this red line? If so, we have to react to that, and we have to move in.
Well, that's Stand in the Pub yesterday evening here in Bristol. A couple of chaps chatting to me there, what they think. I mean, there's a pretty good analysis, Martin, but we're getting absolutely zero of this. I mean, zero anywhere in the London media, anywhere.
Well, yes, it's been very dispiriting, although I'm not at all surprised to see it.
Well, that's part of the point of propaganda, isn't it? It's to demoralise.
Well, it demoralises. What it does is people have been pre-programmed to see this in one particular way. And, as I'm mentioning to Tim earlier, basic facts about the Maidan coup just not penetrated him. He's a political activist. He's a local councillor. He follows the news, but he didn't know anything about
We've got a couple of people here not talking about history, but we're talking about where this is going, and the fact that it's inevitable that Russia's going to win. They're looking at the potential that there might be some kind of no man's land zone in the middle of Ukraine somewhere, where the Russians to the east and the Ukrainian army to the west, almost like a kind of North and South Korea potentially.
Well, I don't think it is. I mean, every situation is
how
unique.
It ends up.
There's probably going to be a partition of the Ukraine, as there was a partition of Yugoslavia. I mean, it's very similar situation. The people in the Donbass who've taken 13,000 civilian casualties over the last 8 years, most of them in the first 2 years, are not going to be ruled by Kiev ever again, as far as they're concerned. I
like the idea of just having that chat there, because, we're not getting any of that anywhere else, and it just shows you that there's loads of people out there who've got a completely different point of view, but that view is not being represented at all. Thanks to those two very articulate chaps. And it's not just them that's talking about propaganda, it's also the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, as he he did, and I'll put a link up to it on our show page at thisweek.org.uk, and 40-minute long press conference, which he released round about just a couple of hours before last Friday's programme. A brilliant thing, which has been being repeated. And by the way, they have, it seems like, early evening bulletins on the hour on RT, on the Odyssey platform, which has been blocked from YouTube, but at least in this country. So let's have a listen now to Sergei Lavrov. I mean, there's some terrific analysis by the Russian Foreign Minister, but this about the propaganda war is particularly fascinating, I think, since that's what we're talking about specifically now.
We are very, very small player in international information war. The information, world information is dominated by the media belonging to the Americans, the Brits, Anglo-Saxons in general, and of course the Germans, the French, and others. It's another matter what is the quality of those